mainly I focus on standards, but there's a couple of areas where I've seen the standards bodies kind of shake out, where everybody was trying to basically be one standard to rule them all. So we basically spent 2 years fighting before coming to the realization that you pretty much have from day one that we'll never have one standard at that. And then I'm talking at that application layer. I think the world's settling out on like IPv6 and things of that nature, and that middleware is getting pretty solid, and that's really what my focus is. But at that top layer, you're always going to have an Amazon protocol, an Apple protocol. You're going to have OCF. You're going to have ... and all these things. And there's, it's really people aren't adequately incentivized just to have interoperability at the application layers, where I would say we're at with the ecosystems. And before it was more just trying to beat everybody, and now we're just kind of netting out. Yeah, no, I don't. You can actually tell that people do not want to interop because it's hard to see the business benefit yet of doing that, and when you can still sell them the entire kitchen based on the phone that you bought. Yeah, so it's not this, kumbaya situation where everybody's running towards standards in most of the places. I think it's a little different when you go one layer lower in the ecosystem. So the key challenges in this area, if you accept that we're always going to have, I don't know, a dozen top-level protocols and people with their own ecosystems, we're seeing some challenges around things that people didn't even consider. So while they were trying to decide what the one standard should be, we weren't working on like session management. We weren't working on the notion of protocol negotiation. For example, the same way that when you make a call on your computer, it figures out who's talking on the other end and what codec to use and what bit rate and things like that. Now we're going to do the same thing. I'm a light bulb and I use OCF, and I can also use OMA Lightweight for device management, for example. And those, then having on the other side of that, having the network that you're on, if it's in the enterprise, they're going to want to have policy based on that, right? And in the home, that's still kind of the Wild West. So how do you decide? It's really a bad analogy, but I remember back in the 80s where like suddenly you just have a new long distance carrier. You really didn't know why suddenly I have a new long distance carrier. It could actually happen in the home as well, where suddenly I now have a different device that's now managing all the devices in my home, simply because you chose wrong in the selection of things. So there's lots of problems like that are starting to shake out. But probably the number one reason, and the reason that Cisco's here in GlobalPlatform, is security. And what I've seen the last 3 years is people spending a lot of energy trying not to do secure hardware because it's been expensive to do in low numbers, right? And realizing that you can't get very far without it, especially if you are trying to do. In the beginning, the ship was on smart home, so you can get away without having security or having proprietary security because you can do something like rolling keys or something that's your own thing. But if you want to get into industrial space, if you want to get into the enterprise, you have to do some sort of standardized security, and you need to have immutable identity, so that way we can administer that device, right? And that's why this is coming to the forefront, and this is why we helped start IoTopia here in GlobalPlatform. Is that we need to bring these secure practices. We need to make it easier. It's hard to do security today because everybody owns a different piece, right? So you have the network layer. Cisco can certainly tell you that everything is safe on the network. You have other people that can do the device. You'll have people that write the specifications for the devices. GlobalPlatform has their piece. This is how you use a trust execution environment, for example. Then you have the application frameworks like OCF or ... or things like that, or 1M to M, that then take it from there to help you try to build an application, or even the proprietary ones like Azure or Amazon, things like that. And as a developer, you might actually be more likely to go to something proprietary because they have better documentation. They have an easier way to just get set up and run because they have a business incentive to put all that tooling together. Standards have a harder time in that area unless you have a large coalition of the willing come in and actually put those things together, right? So right now, I think that's the problem. And trying to, with security, trying to get it to the point that we can deliver end-to-end application security. And that's the place where it falls down. You probably heard, like a couple of years ago, Cisco came out with a stat from surveys that we've done that 75% of enterprise trials for IoT were failing, right? And for different reasons. One of the largest reasons being security, it's just not knowing if you're secure and not knowing how to roll this thing out. And you can't without identity. You just, unless you're on a completely air-gapped network, and even then you're taking your chances, right? So what we need to be able to do is have open source. Basically, just you start at a top-level application, and you can just grab that application framework and you pull into that GlobalPlatform or trusted computing or whatever you need underneath that through APIs, right? And basically have the ability to grab the code, build your application, and you know that it's just going to work. You didn't have to go figure out how to integrate a trust execution environment. You didn't have to go figure out how to do secure by design, because we did secure by design here in IoTopia, and we integrated those things back in. So. Yes. I mean, if you see the Gartner hype cycle for IoT, right? I mean, this inflection point of getting to 50 billion things, or I don't know what the current number is, it just keeps moving out, right? And this is why it keeps moving out, is because we're all looking past these first few years where we're figuring out, well, what is the business motivation? Like, everybody says it's to get the metadata and do all this stuff, but making those relationships is difficult. And if you set up, if you try to build your whole business model around data lakes and data mining, it's going to take a long time to do that. But if you aren't solving these other problems like identity, again, we just keep pushing it out. And that's, in some cases, I don't think people are any further than they were a couple of years ago, because nobody wanted to bite the bullet and just do this, come up with a strong identity scheme for devices. So we're still in that square, and some. So. I think basically you need to make it easier. If you want to do something standards-based, if you want to get it out there into all the different ecosystems, you need to make it as easy as picking up something from an end-to-end vendor. Today, you can go get a platform from Azure or Amazon or Heroku or these other guys, and just start building in that area. But you're limited to the partnerships that they put together, and then you still have, essentially a technical walled garden in many cases that maybe seem desirable at the beginning, but then you've locked yourself into that implementation. And you maybe not be thinking about that as a startup, but 3 years from now you may want to be shifting over to something new, and you can't because you locked into that ecosystem with proprietary hardware. If we can make it just as attractive to just come pick up a standardized environment, like and I'm heavily involved in OCF, and we do we've been doing commercial work there. To be able to do building management systems with using this middleware. So picking up, nobody can agree on that top. We can agree on the middle. We can agree on IPv6. We can agree on what the security should look like, and we can build from that middle out. So basically a very thick neck IP hourglass, right? And just trying to fill out that hourglass in the middle. It's going to fan out at the bottom based on the PHY that you're using, whether you're wireless or 802.3 two-wire or things like that. And at the top, it's going to fan out based on which application protocols you want to use. So I think creating that source code and creating a specification that allows you to run multiple application protocols over the top is what I've been focused on in combination of OCF and GlobalPlatform for the commercial space. So. Well, I look at the work that GlobalPlatform has done securing the payment industry and getting their stuff onto basically every smartphone, which I think if even developers knew that this was already on the phones they use, and that's why they can store the tickets that they bought, that they get on their phone and do, Google Pay and things like that, is because this is on the phone. They'd realize they want the same things in the IoT devices that they're shipping, right? So I think we have a huge role to play there. It's a natural shift to move over and focus on the IoT when it's just yet another environment where you can't log in, right? Your devices aren't going to log into the network every day and tell you who they are. So it's a natural fit for GlobalPlatform to move there, and I think the motivation that we set up the IoTopia program, the stuff that I'm seeing around the programs to take this to lower end chips like MCUs, I think that's incredibly important and is going to add value, because you want to run, a lot of this IoT stuff, devices are going to be very commodity devices, right? So we need to get down to the lowest price point we can, the lowest, the most commodity hardware that we can in some factors, but still adding value, so.